Hello, dear friends. Thank you for joining the Spiritist Talk series promoted by the United States Spiritist Federation every Saturday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. I'm very happy to be here to host this talk this morning by Mark Magalhães, who will be leading our live with the theme Spiritual and Physical Pathogens of Disease. Before we begin, I would like to take a brief moment for some announcements. Firstly, there is a podcast-like series every week, and it's entitled Psychology and Spirituality, a bridge to a better life based on the works by Joanna De Angelis. A new episode will be aired every Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. The Psychology and Spirituality weekly talks are based on the works of Joanna De Angelis and will offer a safe space to confront, compare, correlate, and expand spiritual concepts from a psychological lens, bringing insights, practical tips, and real-world advice to help you lead a better life. Subscribe to receive notifications of the new episodes at the USSF YouTube channel. Secondly, the United States Spiritist Federation is hosting the 17th U.S. Spiritist Symposium on September 30th, 2023, and it is taking place in Portland this year in Oregon. The symposium will focus on the topic of spiritual path to mental balance, with a full-day program including talks, panels, Q&A sessions, youth panel, and kids activities. Please save the date. And thirdly, on the screen you will note a QR code. If you want to help the USSF produce more publications and promote Spiritism to everyone, please scan the QR code on screen for your donation. Now back to you, Marco. It is so good to have you with us today.
Thank you very much.
Yes, welcome. Together with everyone who is watching this live, we want to warmly welcome you. It is wonderful to have you today.
Thank you for having me, and it's an honor to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Marco.
Okay, so first of all, thank you everyone that's connected, watching us, and the ones that are going to be watching afterwards. Um, um, Today we're going to talk about the spiritual and the physical perspective of diseases, and this is something that I really take it close to my heart because I know Sunshine has some more announcements, maybe, or you okay? Can we go on, Sunshine? We're good. Okay. It's something that I take very close to my heart because I by training, I'm a pathologist, I'm a scientist, um, and I've been working in spiritism now for many years, and I always try to understand what I do with my patients and in clinic, and understand the spiritual perspective of it. So that's what we're mostly going to be talking about today. And we're going to start with some concepts, right? Because it's important, particularly for those who maybe are not used to spiritist literature that much and are still trying to understand what the spiritual perspective is. We get this. We can get a lot of information from the Gospel According to Spiritism and Spirit's book. Those are two essential pieces of work by Allan Kardec, which help us understand a lot of who we are today in our bodies, and our physical and spiritual bodies, right? And we can start with, for example, in the letter to Corinthians, we have this very interesting passage, right? That Paul is going to say, do you know that your body is a temple or the Holy Spirit is in you, whom you have received from God, right? Therefore, honor your God with your body, right? So that is such an interesting warning and advice to us, right? Because here, obviously, he's talking about us combine our spiritual body, our physical body. And we know André Luiz in Conduta Espírita is going to say to us, the body is the first loan received, right? So think about this. So this is like our tool, right? This is what we receive in order to be able to, grow morally, to help others, to be who we are as a spirit, right? So that's our physical body we're talking about, right? Flesh, right? What we have, what you can see, right, with your physical eyes, right? But there's more to it, right? So you can see all these systems and components, right, of our physical body there. So what else, right, do we talk about when we think about spiritual things? So that's we think about how does disease and a physical perspective, right, occurs. And this is coming from science, straight from science, right? So what do we know about diseases, for example? A lot of things science has taught us, right? For example, what makes, as you see in the screen, like a normal, beautiful cell that is like this little powerhouse in our bodies that has so many reactions and things happening at the same time. So we can actually use this beautiful machine to receive our first loan, right, from God. So a lot of things can happen, and science has shown to us, right, that can affect how this body, how this machine that we receive can actually develop disease processes, right? So, for example, we have some here mutations, right, that can happen. I know these are DNA mutations that happen inside the nucleus of the cell through many, many different mechanisms. And we know a lot of them, right, from what we hear from science, smoking, exposure to carcinogens, right, to sunlight, for example, is a big one, right? Some infections can do that too. Some viral infections, as we know, can promote the development of cancers, right? Like, for example, cervical cancers and oropharyngeal cancers, particularly now. And obviously the big one we all know, right? Smoking, for example, can induce those mutations, right? You can have mutations that are spontaneous, that can occur at any time. They can affect any system, right? Nutrition, right, can also, we know, it's a big problem, right? Chronic inflammatory diseases. So this is what we know from science. We know how this body, the cell, the system that we're talking about can evolve and develop a disease process, right? So what does Spiritism has to say about this, right? So that's that's the link. That's what we're going to be talking about today, right? Because a lot of the information we have today, it's well scientifically proven, right? We say, there's research that explains this, and I do that. That's my job, right? I actually do it in the lab, and I figure out mechanisms of disease. Now, what is interesting now is that I can do that, but also I really want to make that link to who we are really, which is not just the physical body, right? So in moving next, we learn in Spiritism this amazing concept, right? That helps explain so much about who we are, right? Because you're only looking at the physical part of things. It's very difficult to explain everything, as you probably know, right? So in that sense, we have in the Spirit's book, right? One question that's going to say this. So, for example, what, right, would the body, what would be our body if it did not have a soul, right? That's the question Allan Kardec asks, right? And the spirits are going to answer. So a mass of flesh, right, of matter, right? And then they continue, right? In the introduction to the Spirit's book, there's going to be this beautiful passage, right, talking about the spiritual body, right? And Allan Kardec is going to say this. So the link, or the perispirit, right, unites, right, the body and the spirit to who we are, right? So there's this integration system, right, that happens that allows us as a spirit, right, to fully function in this physical creation, which is our body, right? So remember that our body is created there's a spiritual principle, right? And that's the spirits are coming from. And there's the material principle, right? That comes from the universal cosmic fluid that forms our bodies, right? Physical bodies. So there has to be a way of integrating this, right? So I can be fully myself in this world, right? The only way to do that is by this spiritual body or perispirit, right? So, and Allan Kardec, if you really I think it's important, particularly if you don't understand a lot of this concept, you can read the Introduction to Spirits book, because Allan Kardec will continue and say the spirit retains the perispirit or the spiritual body, right? And it's invisible to us, right? It's hard to, to describe. So in question 93 to 95 in Spirit's book, they're going to go through this. And they say, what is this spirit? What is this, right? And we can only find a few words to describe it. For example, it is variable, right? It's a type of body that depends on where you are in the universe. It looks different, right? Because it takes from that particular niche environment. It's made obviously from materials from that planet, from that world. It is invisible. It's kind of vaporous phase, so it's hard to determine the shape and the size and the looks of it. So what is it important? Because it can change, right? You can change shape, you can change size, you can be dense so you can see it, you can be less dense so we don't see it. There you go. So now we can start to understand a lot of things, right? And most importantly, it is the connection, right? That's really what's going to connect our physical body, right? What we just talked about, the disease mechanism from science to basically who we are as a spirit, right? So now that we know a little bit more about the spiritual body, right? How can we make that connection, right? And Allan Kardec, again, is going to explain to us, again, in the Spirit's book, question 135, right? So humans are composed of three things, very didactic. This is our Professor Kardec, right, talking to us. And I really apologize. I might be losing my voice, so we're going to have to, have to bear with me, right? So first, the body of material body, right, the physical body, similar to that of animals, right, to obviously whoever living form that's in this planet, right? That's what science is explaining to us very well, right? The second is the soul or the spirit, right, which incarnates in the body, which is actually who we are, right? And the third is the link, right, that unites these two, right? So everything we're going to be talking about today is really focusing on that link, right? Because that is really this incredible information that we have now that one day will make way into conventional science, right? Streamlined science, because that will help us understand most of the current issues that our biological sciences cannot explain completely, right? All right, so let's keep going, right? So for us to understand that connection, right? There's a few things we need to remember. So this is a representation of a cell, right? A single cell, right, in our body. And we have billions of those, right? That's how the tissues or organs are all formed, right, by specialized cells. So what Allan Kardec brings to us, and most importantly, what André Luiz brings to us, is that our perispirit actually connects to every single cell in our body. So it's a tight connection. There's this beautiful connection represented here on the slide. And that connection, it allows, right, our physical body to show, right, what our perispirit and our spirit is carrying or is thinking, or the issues that we had before, or anything that has to happen, right, in this incarnation will go through that link, right? The perispirit will carry that over in a cell-by-cell basis into our physical bodies, right? So why is that important, right? So this is now from Evolution to Worlds, chapter 5, right? In Evolution to Worlds, there's going to be this very nice passage that, again, I highly recommend you guys reading, this book. So not only they're connected by cell by cell, right, the perispirit, the physical body, but they have this, they call it the structural plasticity. In other words, like it's a dynamic connection, right? That can be tighter, can be looser, right? You can change shape, you can change forms, right? You can manifest in different ways, right? So now you can start to have an understanding, well, when I'm sad, when I'm happy, when I'm sick, when I'm, your body shows, right? And that's why, because your perispirit is actually sending that type of vibration directly to every single cell in your body. And if you start to think now, well, wait a minute, if I have a disease on a particular organ or system, what does that mean? It means that your perispirit, through those cell-to-cell connections to your physical body, again, is manifesting whatever incarnatory planning or whatever issues and vibrations that you carried over on a perispirit from previous experiences, or even something that is planned for this experience, will be carried over to that particular area of your body, right? So, Andrea Luiz continues and says, the cells, they are under the regulation of the spirit. So your physical body, obviously, is under the regulation of who you are, the spirit. And that connection is happening through perispirit, through the main key points of connection, right? For example, the coronal link, for example, goes through your brain, your neurons, connect to your cells, right? So, the in every and I'll read from Andrea Luiz, right? They say, the cells, when they are adjusted to this environment, right, it demonstrates the natural behavior of the operator, in other words, the spirit. So the cell is being directed directly, right, from the spirit. And that means, in under this order, right, it communicates to one another, and it communicates to our physical body and to the world, right? So it is an interesting connection, right? If we learn that connection, again, it makes it a lot easier for us to understand a lot of things, right? Okay, so we learned that we have a physical body that science explains to us, beautiful organs, amazing system, incredible design by our creator. And then there's this link with who we are, the spirit that can manifest itself through the body, and depending on all the things we live through, all these experiences and who we are, our body changes, right? So we can look different, so we can change the DNA in our cells when our body's being created, of course, right? We can do it as a spirit, but also we have assistance from during the incarnatory process, as we also know from the Andrea Luiz. It's going to help form and shape, right, those connections in every single cell. So one of the, now I'm talking about my scientist hat now. So one of the things that are very interesting in biological science is that, at the beginning we thought that everything could be explained by a single DNA mutation, right? You change it a little bit, change the expression of a gene, you do a mutation, translocation, any type of rearrangement of the DNA will lead to changes in the body. They'll, for example, make you look tall or not, or your skin color changes, your eye color changes, and all of this, right? But science is such an interesting thing. So, for example, the concept of races, right? That's an interesting one. And that comes from the premise that when we look at another person, right, they may look different from us, right? And because certain traits are carried over in particular areas of the world, then we tend to think that, well, those are different races, right? That's how humanity evolved. What is quite interesting to know, though, is that in humans, the differences in the DNA sequences, right, between two individuals are so tiny that other species that look identical to the eyes have 10 to 100 times more differences, right, in DNA sequencing, and they look identical. A good example, like penguins, for example. If you look at penguins, they look almost identical to all of you, right? But the DNA changes between two identical penguins are far more diverse than between two individuals that look absolutely different, right? And it is interesting to see that, because that's just showing you how we as a spirit can make slight changes, post-translational changes to DNA, or even very, very small changes in one or two genes that will make us look very different. And we behave different because we're different spirits, right? But to the eyes of this society, that means that, we're different races, which does not exist. So races do not exist in humans, right? So we all know, we use that term all the time, which is kind of a horrible thing. But anyways, that's a sidestep from the main conversation. Okay, so let's talk about diseases now. So in other words, we are basically identical, right? Our physical bodies, very small changes, right? Um, so what is the disease then? Now, if you know that we're composed of three different things, right? So the disease process has to occur in all those layers. Otherwise, it wouldn't happen, right? It doesn't exist, right? So what happens then, right? So in the in the evolution towards chapter 17, right? That's an interesting passage that says, Andrea Luiz is going to say, the disease emerges when. So when does it happen? Right? Patients, or us, right? Without humility, patience, and spirit of service, and devotion to God, cannot assimilate the benefits of the divine currents, right? Of the divine love that circulates through all of us, right? Stimulating the maximum existence of Earth, right? So see, the disease process really starts way before you can see it in the physical body, right? By the time you're seeing your body, it's already installed there, right? Before, right? Because of that, because of issues that are coming and emerging from the spirit, right? So they do manifest themselves through your body. And we can, in science, in medicine, in pathology, in my case, I can look at a slide and I can look at an organ and say, oh, this is a disease process. And I put a name on it, right? That's my job. That's what I do in the lab or in the clinic. But what we're looking at is a process that started, as Andrea Luiz puts very closely, when we start to deviate from the divine laws. So we start to lose the classical things that we're supposed to do: the humility, the patience, and the service, right? So we break that connection. That starts to leave a little bit of an imbalance, right? We stop assimilating the divine currents from the God. It starts to, and our mental energy starts to vibrate in such a level that's going to start to change our perispirit, right? So that creates this little cloud of energy that goes through perispirit, and the perispirit will actually push that through our physical body, and then we start to see diseases. Now, there's a mechanism for that, believe it or not. There's actually a mechanism that's described by Andrea Luiz. So, and I created a little diagram here to help us out, right? A sip of water. We're gonna make through this. I hope so. Okay. So what is the mechanism then? So Andrea Luiz said, almost all of the diseases appear secondary to the phenomena over unhealthy zones of predisposition in our perispirit, right? They form over, and that imbalance, right, can rupture, can separate, as you can see here, this point of connections between the physical body and the perispirit, right? This rupture, this lack of continuity due to that zone of unhealthy vibrations and unhealthy predispositions, by creating those breakpoints, right, it allows that your physical body to start to show an imbalance in that mechanism that keeps it going, right? So that will lead to, for example, DNA mutations, infections, right? Organ dysfunctions, right? And that can happen in very specific areas of your body, right? So there you go. So the mechanism of the disease from the spiritual perspective is really an imbalance, or this unhealthy energies that we accumulate in our perispirit, right? That will manifest themselves in those break points or just disruptions, I would say, with the spiritual body. And that's by Andrea Luiz. Okay. Now you can imagine Andrea Luiz saying this, like, oh, in the early 1900s, right? You can imagine the pushback, right? From thinking something that is so incredible, but we're barely starting to understand that, right? So what else? So that is the process. Now, Andrea Luiz gives us examples, right, in the evolution two worlds. So what he say, for example, is that infectious diseases, and he gives example of tuberculosis, right, which is still going on in the world till today, right? Bacterial endocarditis and all these diseases, they're all, again, manifestation of that dysfunction, right? So this is what he's going to say. So once a dysfunction, right, between the perispirit and the spirit and the physical body has been verified, the entire area is affected by this. It becomes susceptible, right, to infectious processes, to DNA mutations, right? It becomes unguarded, unprotected, if you think that way, right? And they lose the ability of regenerating or repairing themselves, right? Now, as you can see in the little diagram here, the sequential steps from, you see on the left side there, your spirit, which doesn't really have a shape or size or form. I'm just recreating a body just so you guys keep perspective. But the spirit we can't really tell kind of how it looks, right? The perispiritual body, which has somewhat of a shape of your body, but not necessarily is very dynamic. It doesn't look exactly like a body. It can change shape and size and forms and colors, and it's very malleable, right? And then your physical body represented in orange here, which again will be the last step of that disease process, right? As you can see here, right? So if you look back in the disease mechanism that we just talked about, so just going over one more time, and I love diagrams, as you can tell. Yeah, I think that's from my teaching background in university. So you have interesting processes that you can explain now, right? Because before, if you don't, you may not be familiar with this, but from a science perspective, right? And I think there's a question about this. Luis is asking a question about this, which was very timely, right? So DNA mutations are not randomly. Yeah, they're not. Like they're really not. So sporadic mutations that are induced by UV rays and things like that. Yeah, they're somewhat random from the eyes of science, but they tend to occur in clusters, right? They tend to occur in area. We know that now, right? There's a lot of changes that tend to cluster around pathways, and I think, and I don't have a scientific evidence for that because our science cannot test that. We cannot test that hypothesis today. But I believe that, specific areas of the perispirit will channel that damage, right? Will allow that type of mechanism, like a specific pathway, to be mutated in specific areas of the body. And I think that's induced or guided by us as spirits, right? But that's too complicated for 1 hour lecture. We can go back to it. But now, what we can explain now, for example, is why do when we come back and we're tiny little babies, and it seems like, all of a sudden we're hit with a particular disease in a particular organ that kind of came out of nowhere, right? So that helps us explain that now, because the perispirit, as we just talked about, will carry over, right, those areas of disruptions, right, that are accumulations of the vibrations and the actions and whatever incarnatory planning we're having for this incarnation. It's carried over, right, as you can see in the diagram, from one incarnation to another incarnation. And it could be a damage that I inflicted on my own body, right, by abuses, by vices, by actions, by thoughts, like all of those things generate these areas of imbalances. And this will manifest in specific areas of our body. Like we have so many examples in the literature, right? For example, we have, many stories that Andrea Luiz brings to us, right? For example, that you have, the in between two worlds, like you have, And you have the story, for example, someone who consumed poison, right? That affected the throat, and then they eventually discarnated because of that, and then they come back, and then they will have manifestations of inflammatory diseases of the throat that are life-threatening, right? When they come back, right? So that happens all the time, and that is carried over by the perispirit, right? And then when the perispirit, when we incarnate again, the body's actually, it will almost like filter through, right? That type of energy that we're accumulating in that particular area of the body, right? And that would actually lead to the mutations or to the DNA pathway changes, right? On specific areas of the body, right? So that is the divine, like the perfection of justice occurring right there. So I caused it, right? I did not have a chance to fix this out, right? So I will carry that with me, right? And then when I have another chance of trying out again, I will deal with the consequences of my own actions. And those consequences are very attenuated, right? Because God is perfect and just. It's not like a one eye for an eye kind of thing. We know that, right? We can change things. We don't have to go through the disease we don't, right? But in some cases we do, because we're very stubborn, right? And we, okay, this is the last resort, right? But we carry that over, and that will lead to the type of increased risks or clear manifestation of diseases that we develop, right? Now, we have modifiers of the disease too, right? And that's listed there, because it does not mean that I cut my arm in one incarnation, I'm going to be born without an arm the next one. This is a simplistic, almost like nonsensical way of seeing divine justice, right? We know that. We cannot use that as a guide. The reality is we'll have chances to correct. We can change things. We can modify things, right? And we're going to get that information also from Kardec and Jones in a minute. But we do carry a risk, right? And the risk is modulated by us. So we're in the driving seat all the time, right? Because we know that even if we carry a mutation, we're actually not necessarily going to develop a disease because of those mutations, right? And we have examples actually in science that prove that, right? So there are several studies now that looked at patients that had violent deaths, right? And they look at the bodies afterwards for signs of disease. So one of the interesting things they found is that in many patients who actually discarnated for other reasons, right? They found, for example, circulating tumor cells. They found, evidence of diseases that were actually not manifested, right, in the physical body. So think about that. So the individual, for example, probably had some of those areas of imbalances in the perispirit that manifested in parts of the body, but they were able to manage, and it did not develop into disease, right? Not everything will develop into a disease, right? But in spiritism, sometimes we kind of, try, when we start to learn that, well, there's, something happened, we have to pay for it kind of thing, we're responsible, we're going to come back, we're going to deal with it. Yeah, but we overdo it. In other words, we start to think that, oh, everything that happens is going to have something. There has to be an explanation for everything that happened before. Calm down, right? We need to calm down, because things are 10 million times more complicated than we think. And we're just barely getting a little sense of it. And the reality is that we're fine. We're assisted all the time. Look, he's always there connected to us, right? But we now explain, right, why certain bodies are born with different things. And that is carried over from the perispirit, right? Or increased risks, right, in general. Okay. So in reversion to words, Andrea is going to continue and say this. So when synergistic work of cells in a particular tissue, right? The tissue disrupted, right? They can evolve into diseases and cancer and all the things that we talked about, and mutations, right? But symptomatic and asymptomatic, diseases with or without symptoms or manifestations, right? They can be stabilized, or they can be promoted according to the dispositions of the mind. So yes, we still have control. Those are the modifiers we talked about, right? There are this, the effort of readjustment, according to Andrea Luiz, is the defense against the development of certain processes, right? So if we work on that improvement of ourselves, we can modulate the process of disease that's going to show up. Does that mean that we're not going to have any diseases? No, it does not mean we're not there yet, right? We still have a lot that we have to deal with, right? Because of the stage of evolution that we are now. But yeah, but there will be one day that we don't have to go through any of this. Oh, 100%, right? I don't know when. Don't ask me. It's going to take a long time. And for me, at least, oh my God, I don't want to think about it. But it'll take some time for sure. Okay. All right. So I'll give you an example now, because again, I'm biased and I like pathology. Okay. So these are two. So this is a good example. So this is on the left side is a slide of a normal bone. So it's a nice cortical bone. A nice lamellar bone with bone marrow around it, those little cells. And on the right side is a bone in the same area, but now this is a disease called osteosarcoma, which is a horrible bone cancer. So just to see how the cells look so different, so disorganized. So there's this loss of coordination, loss of controls, right? The cells lose control of how they grow and what they do. They become completely disorganized, right? And again, now look at this image and remember Andrea Luiz telling us Evolution to Worlds, the disruption, right, of the controlling part of the spirit perispirit axis into that connection between cell to cell, right? So you can actually see it, right? How that disconnection, that disruption cause or predisposes you, right, to the development of things like this, right? So this is a good example for you. Okay, so obviously we have many examples. For example, I brought some here from Andrea Luiz because he brings this in Evolution to Worlds, right? So, for example, individuals who have like wounds to the heart, like suicidal intent, right, in the past, they can return, yes, with changes in the blood, prothrombin levels, which is like one of the parts of the coagulation cascade, right? They can reborn with body dystonia, right, which is the movement disorder, bleeding disorders, right? Poisoning can lead to hematological diseases, right, down the road because you carry that over, right, in your perispirit. Can cause changes to the bone marrow, anemia, which is like low blood count, low red blood counts. Anyway, so all these changes in blood, and this is just examples, but please don't take this as a guide. It's like, oh, this is happening all the time. No, it doesn't, right? We know that, okay? For example, a fall from a great height and addictions can have cerebral problems, right? Epilepsy, palsies, glandular changes, right? PTH axis and all this. So there's a lot of things that can happen, and Andrea Luiz talks about, right? When you kind of carry over, right, those mechanisms, those disease mechanisms, right? But this is just an example, right? Not a guide, okay, to make it very clear. Okay, so how do we modify things from the spiritual perspective, right? Now we got to understand this, like this is all, right, connected, right? So to move to cancel out, right, that type of disrupting vibrations and energies that we carried over, really the best thing we can do is to change our vibrations, right? And Andrea Luiz, in Evolution to Worlds, again, he's going to say, when the patient, this is us, right, adopts a favorable behavior, right, by the sympathy that instills in the neighbor, right, by the physical forces that find solid support, right, in the solidarity and recognition of good things, that will absorb from those. So we're going to absorb those nice currents, right, because we're connecting stronger and stronger, right, with what's coming directly from our Creator, right? And we're able to circumscribe or control that dysfunction, right? And sometimes we can actually completely get rid of it, right? In other times, we can make it a lot easier for us, right? And we do have examples of that too. someone who was planned out to be born with a catastrophic, life-threatening disease ends up with a tiny little change in the body, right? We still complain though. It's like, oh my God, I was born like, this way. But it could have been 10 times worse, right? But we were able to modify it by actually improving ourselves, right? Now, this is an interesting point. And I'm going to move to the next slide so you guys can see it. So the favorable behavior, right, that we're talking about includes, sympathy to others, living the righteous life, right, as we describe in the Gospels, right? Loving your neighbor, loving yourself. Like those are the things that are said constantly, right? But are acted on sparingly, right? So, and I think this is one of the issues that we found out we've done something, or we are like this, and we recognize it. But then the next step is the hard one, right? The modification, right? So that's where we are right now, right? And charity, and we know all of this. So in Evolution Two Worlds, there's this very interesting concept that Andrea Luis is going to bring, and he's going to say this. Constant goodness, and I got to make it clear. There's a word constant there, so it's not goodness. Like it's like I'm doing all these bad things, right? And I go on the weekend, and it's like I'm going to help one person, right? And you go, it's great, thank you for doing that. But listen, like this has to be a constant behavior. That's what Andrea Luis is telling us, right? So constant goodness generates constant goodness, right? Forward movement. And that while untiring movement, in other words, this constant, relentless moving towards the good, right? Continues, right? All the evil that's piled up on us is attenuated gradually. So it's like math, right? So the more you added these positive changes, the more you cancel out the negative things, right? Although it's not a 1-to-1 ratio, right? Sometimes that can be rebalanced in our favor, right? So it continue to the point that, listen, Jelly is going to say, without the express necessity of resorting to the help of disease. What is Andrea Luis talking about, right? The help of disease. Yes. So he's now touching onto something that is really the most important piece of information of today. That disease is actually part of the cure. I know it sounds completely crazy, right? But the reality is, right, when a disease is manifesting in your body, it means that this is like a filter, right? This is where you're cleansing out, you're leaving the consequence. You're actually feeling it. So it's a part of the cure. In other words, you're being cured spiritually through the process of the disease. Now, do we have to go through it? No. Do we have to suffer? No. Sometimes we go through hard things. Yes, those are trials, right? What we have to understand is this is part of the cure process, right? And as Andrea Luis says very clearly, without the express necessity of that help, we can still do things, right? Eliminating the remnants of darkness. So when it's coming through your body, the disease process is actually cleansing out from your perispirit into your body and then going away, right? Of all the things that are incorporated in our mental background. So that's really, really important to me. Okay. And of course, right? How do we do this, right? It's right here. Evolution Two Worlds, one more time. As you can tell, I like that book, right? So support for others creates protection for ourselves, right? So support for others, right? Isn't that crazy? It's like we think about this. So we and this is like interesting about spiritism. I think is that it teaches us obviously a lot of things about things that we have no clue. What happened and why and when, right? About the spiritual world, but also helps us look inside ourselves, right? And understand this, right? So for example, so support for others creates protection for ourselves. right? Which is why in the principles of Jesus, uprooting from us animality, pride, and vanity, and greed, and cruelty, avarice, exhorting to the simplicity, humility, fraternity, without limits, right? Remember how many times we should forgive? How many times we should do the things? Not 7 times, no, 77 times, like 7,000,007 times. Like you keep going, right? That's what Jesus told us, right? Without limits, unconditional forgiveness, right? Establish the perfect immunology. Immunology referring here to the immune system or protection system, right? In our body, in our inner life. Strengthening the power of the mind in self-defense against the destructive and degrading elements that surround us. So, do you really want to cure yourself? Bingo. We're going to go back to the same idea of charity, right? So, how do we really, how do we take all of this, right? How do we take this information and able to change things, right? There you go. Supporting others, fraternity without limits, forgiveness. That will create the connection, strengthen the connection. It creates the perfect balance that will allow our immune systems, like a spiritual immune system. You didn't know you had that, right? There you go. We're always learning something. So to protect ourselves against those degrading effects, right, that will manifest themselves through a disease process, right? So we have the formula. It's fantastic. Okay. Now, there's a lot of things we can still mention, like in science, for example. There's like this is a trend that's increasing, and I'm very happy to talk about this. There's this massive amount of information that now showing that altruism has an innumerable amount of positive effects in health. See, now this is our science catching up to that information I just gave you about Jean-Louis, right? So we know altruistic behaviors are associated with better health outcomes, right? We know that some small studies have shown that private prayer can actually lead to some benefits. There's a review by Dr. Marlene about this, right? And I'll show you, for example, this is just one of the reviews that she shows. A number of papers listed here showing that prayers and this connection, right, with the creator and the good energies can lead to improved health outcomes too, right? Now, but the big one is really is loving your neighbor, right? Charity, helping others. This is really what are going to make a change. Establishing that connection, cleaning our perispirit, right, and allowing that that we live an incarnation, like a life, without going through the necessity of the help of disease, as Andrea Luis spoke to people. So the bottom line is that we have many ways of curing ourselves. That is a slow process that requires us to change who we are, right? Morally speaking, the evolution of the person, of the spirit, right? Of implementing, good actions, good changes, right? That will slowly, right, take over and balance out the other things we've done in the past. And then we'll continue that road, right? That will take us to where we want, which is that could be more and more perfect, towards perfection, right, of the spirit. And in instances that we can't do it, right, we actually have this, we said, the help of the disease process that will expedite that process by allowing that energy to be purged, right, purged through your perispiritual body into your body, and then you get rid of that, right, through the alternative process that we call disease. And when that is happening, really, this is the cure, right? So actually, yes, the disease is actually the cure for us as a spirit. Okay, so so that's all we that's kind of end there. So thank you all for this time. We're gonna have go through some questions now. This is the reference for today if you want to look at it. And Luis, do you want me to just go through the questions on the chat? I can do that. Or oh yes.
Thank you so much, Mark. My
You're welcome.
goodness, we're blown away. So much vital information, and we just wish the medical profession and the majority of people on this planet would know what Spiritism offers and what you offered in this talk as a pathway to navigate disease in a more fully embracive, holistic way. And it seems so novel, and yet at the same time, I'm reminded of Socrates, who, an ancient wise man, and he actually told us the same thing. He said, if doctors fail in treating disease, it is because they treat the body without the soul. And because if the whole is not well, so it is impossible for the parts to be well. And yet we haven't listened yet. And Jesus, of course, supported the same thing and what he modeled. So thank you so much, Mark. Wonderful, wonderful. And I'm sure we will have some really good questions for you. Are you ready?
Yes.
Yeah. So here's number one by Violet. I had knee issues. I started complaining about it. And one day, a voice coming from my ear. She heard a voice coming from her. You could have been born in a different body. I stopped my complaining right away. Disease is a cure. What a strange concept.
It is. Yes. I still struggle with that one. I think I'm understanding a little bit more of it now. But, obviously, when you start thinking about it, like, we tend to be we tend to focus on very short-sighted, narrow period of times, right? So if you take the entire existence and you condense it to your disease, then it makes no sense. Like everything is catastrophic. It cannot extend this concept, right? If you're able to take your vision and your concept of time and expand it to your existence, which is actually enormous, right, compared to where you are right now, then the concept makes total sense, right? But again, it's well known that when we're going through a process, it's a lot harder for us to think outside of that process, right? So if we're stuck in a work and doing something, and there's like all these tumultuous things happening, it's very difficult for you to step out of it and say, okay, what's happening there? You can't, right? Because you're kind of surrounded by it, right? That's the same thing when we're all going through disease processes. It's very hard to step outside of it and look from the outside vision and get a better perspective of what's happening. But the reality is, it's one of the most amazing concepts because it allows us to understand more the perfection of the divine justice, right? But again, only if we're able to extrapolate that to existence. In other words, think about this. You're going through suffering now from this visual, from the physical perspective, right? But then when you discarnate, you may discarnate from that disease, right? Because that does not mean that if you pray 1,000,000 times, it's going to go away, because that's not divine justice, right? But it will help you, 100% will help you, right? But you may still have to go through that. But then you come back next time, you got rid of all of that. Like you're done, right? So all you have to do is expand a little bit, like a few existences back and a few forward, and it is very easy to get the concept, right? Now, the idea of the complaining is an interesting one, because I complain all the time. Everyone who does not complain, let me know, because I need to I need to get there. But but it is interesting that the reality is that everything you have right now happening to you is less than what you're supposed to go through. Like everything. Like there's nothing that will be worse for you than what was originally planned or thought or done. That's how God help us every day, right? There's always this constant process of, like, think about kids, right? And I like to make comparison with kids because it puts everything in perspective for everyone, right? So if your kid does something really, really bad, right? And you're very upset. It's like, oh my God, my kid's like doing whatever, right? So when you have to find ways of making that kid understand the consequences of their actions, right? So you do that. But as a parent, you're not going to make them go through something worse than what they've done in order to understand their actions. You're probably going to have a conversation, and that's enough. I say, hey, don't do this. This is bad. This is a sad, and then you move on. In other words, you attenuate the consequence all the time. We do this all the time, right? So if we can do this, like what God is doing it, like God is, just think about this, right? So you're right. Like if you think about something that is manifesting in your body right now, no matter what it is, it be a predisposition or a disease itself, whatever it is definitely attenuated compared to what you actually really done, right? To what was planned. And you can make it even better, right? By continue to implement positive changes, right? And again, that's the concept that a lot of people struggle with, is that by making positive changes, I will not make the disease disappear. And sometimes it happens. Of course, some people deserve it because they've already gone through this. Those are the cures, right? So can people be cured? 100%. Are people cured when they're not supposed to be cured? No, it does not happen, right? So I can't go and try to get someone to cure me if I don't deserve that. It's not going to happen, right? So this is like what sometimes we struggle, right? Because the cure will happen, it's just not now, right? Because it's not time for it yet. But next time, or maybe next, I don't know when, right? So we're always going to be cured. All of us are going to be cured, right? And it depends on us, not on whoever is trying to cure us. That person can sometimes help, right? But the cure is actually completely ours. Like it's our process, our disease, and it's our cure, right? So, yes.
We get what we need, not always what we want, right? But the beautiful thing of embracing disease in this, I want to say new way, even though we know it's not a new way, is that self-responsibility. We know it actually lies in our court of how to deal with disease or imbalances. So the model of being the victim of some force out there falls away. And I think that in itself is healing, because so many of us still like to point the finger at something or someone, right? And at this moment, that model gets busted, so to speak, as well, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, it's wonderful. Yeah, I love it. So then there's another question, Marco, from the USSF. Could we say that the spiritual body is the source of all diseases?
So the spiritual body is it's part of the process of the disease formation. It's not the cause. The cause is always us, right? As a spirit. But now, from a biological perspective, yes. From a biological perspective, the connection between the perispiritual body to a single cell, right, is the essential link that is disrupted in the process of the disease manifesting. So that process, it does happen, but it's a part of a much bigger process, right? That it starts in the spirit. So it always starts on us, right? So nothing happened in the perispirit without us, right? Because that's kind of how it starts, right? In other words, we can modulate what happens in the perispiritual level, energetically speaking, right? Or vibration speaking. And then depending on that modulatory process, whatever is going to manifest in the body, then is a link between the perispirit and the body. But that's always driven, right, by who we are, if it makes sense. So basically there's a kind of 3-step mechanism, right? So we can stop it at any time, right? We can stop it at the source, which is us, right? We can modulate it from the source to the perispirit by implementing positive changes, right? Through prayer, actions, and everything you think about. And we can stop it at the end if with the blessing of medicine, right? That will attenuate the process from the body's end, right? But we have to go through the process, though. Even if medicine is curing us, we still went through the process. So, in other words, it's still a cure. It still counts, right? So, medicine is not getting us rid of anything, really. Like, medicine is acting to complete the process, right? And sometimes medicine is going to come from the body side and is not going to work, right? And that happens because that is the process, right? I had to go through this. And then there's some points that, even though we have the medicine working on the other side, I can't really, get rid of it completely, right? I still have to go through it. So,
Yeah. It's like what Jesus, right? He healed the blind man and then told him to go home, but not through the village.
yeah.
In other words, he needed to change his ways. So if we could see, just for this example, as Jesus as Western medicine, but we still have to not go back to our old ways
Correct.
and make the change on the soul level. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's really looking at disease and the process from a reverse point of view compared to what medicine does, right?
Correct. Yes, the other side. Yes.
Yeah, because it's always, we think disease comes from the body, but it
Yeah.
doesn't. Yeah, that's really, that's so important. Yeah, thank you. Let's see. There's another. Adilson Arroyo, maybe. Loss and anger can make us very, very sick, but love and fraternity can heal us. Yes, right?
Yeah.
So true. Is that why many patients with cancer get better, go in remission, and many get it back?
Well, so one thing I like to do all the time, I have questions, and it's a great question, by the way. And this is something that a lot of people struggle with. We almost always in Spiritism try to make a very simplistic model of everything. Those words, oh, this happened, so this has to have happened. And you try to find reasons why this thing happened or that thing happens. It's almost impossible, really. And actually, like Allan Kardec tells us multiple times, like, please stop trying to figure out things like what happened in the back, what happened in the future, what's going to happen now, why is this happening? So this is a great question because allow us to think that, if someone goes in remission and the disease comes back, does that mean that it's somehow the patient's fault in a way, right? Because of that? I don't know. Like, I think no one can know that, right? Is it exactly what was planned for that individual? Maybe, right? Is this part of the cure process of that person? 100%, right? Could that person have had the disease completely in remission and never come back? Maybe. We cannot tell, right? And if someone tries to tell you in a very beautiful explanation exactly what's happening, I'll tell you almost 100% of the time that is not the case, right? Because the reality is that these processes are very, very complicated. Like what I'm talking about right now is probably less than 0.01% of what we know about these processes. And no one knows. We're maybe in 2,000 years from now, we're going to be able to understand a tiny bit more of that, right? But the bottom line is that, so in what's important really, like answering the question now, is if you understand that the process we're going through, it doesn't matter if there are remissions, there are bumps on the road, ups and downs, right? That can happen in any disease, right? Do not create a sentiment that it's like, oh, it's my fault what's happening. I've done, like, don't go into that mode that's like, this is all bad, it's all my fault, and I'm gonna shrink down, my vibration is gonna get even worse, right? That's not the point. The point is that, okay, I understand this is what I have to go through, and how can I make the best out of this, because it's gonna happen, right? So, and this is interesting because there's studies showing that patients who live in assisted care living facilities, right, the ones that are helping others, they're all going through diseases and hardships, right? A million different types. So the patients who are actually helping more the other ones are the ones that have the best reports in general health, mental health, physical health, like everything. In other words, whether or not the disease is going away or not, the most important thing is like when Jean-Louis told us, like constant goodness, and the goodness towards not only others but yourself too. So don't go into this idea of blaming game and explaining what happened and how, and just take that moment and say, okay, I'm gonna do my best from now on, right? And it is overwhelming. Yes, there's hardships, there's a tough time, I deal with cancer patients every day. So I know, right? But at the same time, we have the recipe, and the recipe is really like do anything you can to improve yourself, and things will happen, right? And they will happen, I can guarantee you, in a way that is actually good for you, right? That's what that's the most important aspect of spiritism. Right?
Yeah, yeah. Charity. And Alan Kardec already told us there's no salvation without charity, and
Yeah.
this gives it new meaning. I was diagnosed with cancer 20 years ago and did not go through allopathic medicine, and found spiritism and healed. Purely just going to God and actually following these maxims. And it was, we can't say, we don't know, as you said, what really happened in the background,
Yeah.
but faith, right? And just to keep going, following the
Exactly.
path of charity as best as we can in our own little imperfect ways,
Exactly. Yeah.
So, yeah. It's wonderful.
Cures can happen all the time, right?
What was that?
Cures, right? It can happen because
Yeah.
it really depends on. So the big question is like, are we ready for it? Right?
Yes.
If we are ready for it, it
Yeah.
will happen,
Yeah.
right? And
Exactly.
you're a great example of that, right?
Yes. Yes.
But we
Yeah.
can't expect that it's going to happen all the time, right? I think
No.
that is the problem. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. I'm daily grateful to
Yeah.
God. And yes. So thank you. So there's another question, Marco.
Yes.
Would it be correct to think that genetic predispositions are buffered in the perispirit and might be brought over on a future life?
Yes. So any genetic changes that occur at the cell level um, is actually directly coming from the perispirit, right? That's exactly how it works. So because biologically speaking, DNA is like a construction material, right? It doesn't have intelligence on its own, right? I've done research on DNA synthesis before with a collaborator of mine, Karina, and basically, you think about Lego, like building blocks, right? DNA is like a ginormous building block, right? You can actually make structures out of it, right? Just like you do construction material.
Mm-hmm.
So now it becomes important for the cell when that particular sequence means something, right? So in that sense, that sequence is brought over in our when our bodies form, right, by the gametes, like from both sexes, and that process, all of it is guided by the spiritual side, right? Even before conception, right? The selection of the cells will be guided with the spiritual assistance, right? And the incarnatory planning will make small changes to that DNA content to manifest what we need in this incarnation. And that process is continuous. So our perispirit will actually translate information directly into a cell and make changes to the way that DNA is read, transcribed, and rearranged all the time, right? So yes, the perispirit is the source of that. In that process, it's the source of the DNA changes on a cell, right? Now, does that so if that is cleansed out, filtered through the body in this incarnation, then we don't carry stuff for the next one. But if we continue doing the same thing over and over, then yes, then we'll continue to accumulate those, right? And then it's a hard time for it to get away. And then eventually, the only resort we have is to have a disease process installed, right? If you think about it, because we that filtering process is not enough, right, to get rid of that imbalance. So that's exactly what happens.
Thank you. Yes, very clear. Yes. And I think there's one more question.
Yep.
Would you say that making the practice of moral charity, as defined by Alan Kardec, the focal point of our lives, is the best healer of disease and best prevention?
Yes, of what 100%, right? And I think Andrea Luiz is so clear about it. He said, constant goodness generates constant goodness, generates immunology for the soul, basically, right?
Yeah.
So we think about this, a lot of people is like, how do I boost my immune system, right? People say that this is a question I get all the time. I'm like, oh, that's a good one. Like, how you boost your immune system, right? You have to really change yourself, right? Because you really want to boost your immune system, you really have to practice constant goodness, and then you're going to boost the immune system. But not only the T cell, B cell that's circulating in your body, you're actually going to boost the one that's really important, right? Which is like how you protect yourself from actually acquiring that process in the beginning, right? So yes, moral, like abiding by divine laws, right? And particularly law of love and charity, as you know, right? But abiding by the divine laws and practicing it, right? Not only saying, right? It's like, happens all the time. Me too, right? You say, oh, I talk about this all the time, and I go out there and something happens, and I get explode, I get upset, and then it's like, oh my God, like what do I do? And then I go back, I was like, okay, I can't do that. It's a process, right? But practicing it, or the energy that we put to implement it, which is that defines what a good spiritist is, right? That is what we focus on, and that is really what's going to cure us at the end, right? Not now. Maybe now I still have to go through a lot of things. We all do, right? But how many incarnations forward now, we're going to look back and say, whoa, look at that. So I finally did it, right? I got rid of one little thing. So we do one by one, right? And that is really the moral compass that Spiritism is bringing to us.
So if we have any doubts what God's laws are or the divine laws are, we know they're written in our conscience, in our hearts. And if we're still in doubt, we can pick up the Spirit's book, and the second half has them really through questions and answers so beautifully explained to us. So we know exactly what to follow. That how to remember to take the vitamin of charity every second, starting with our thinking, right, Marco?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time and this beautiful, important, interesting, and clear talk. We know what to do. Thank you, Marco. And so next week, of course, we have another visitor, another talk. And that's August 12th. And again, at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. Please join us. And this time it will be Luis Villaca, who will be talking on the elemental spirits. So please join us again. And Marco, to complete this beautiful moment, would you be willing to do our closing prayer today?
Of course, yes.
Thank you.
So let us all take this moment of connection with our Creator, our Father, Mother, God, and our Master Jesus, and our fellow spirits inhabiting this world. Close our eyes and think about the blessings that are coming from above. They are touching every single part of this planet, us, our souls, our physical bodies, our spiritual bodies. Let us draw from that energy, the energy of love and the charity. Let us practice what Jesus came to tell us, the real healer, the doctor of the souls. Let's try on a day-by-day basis to listen more, to love more, to help more, so we all combine and continuously can change ourselves and therefore change the entire humanity. Thank you, God, for the opportunity we had today. Let us walk out of today with our energies refueled and our hearts vibrating the notes of love that are coming from above. May we spread this through our thoughts and our actions to all of us around us and the ones that are going through so many hardships today of disease, war, and suffering. Thank you, God, and so be it.